Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the task force members and the California DOJ and all those who support behind the scenes for inviting me to present my family legacy and my views on reparations. Our world broke open after George Floyd and the start of the pandemic. And as a result, we've been given this opening, a portal to re-examine ourselves, our past, and make decisions about how this nation will approach repair and reparations for Black Americans. We know that co-creating reparation policies is a complex exercise, in part because we know the exploitation of Black American labor for hundreds of years is in direct correlation with America transforming into the global superpower we know today. So there's lots of unfolding and reckoning that's necessary for this restoration work to be done right. It's my theory that when dealing with complicated, painful, and deeply rooted issues, strategizing and applying intellectual frameworks can only take us so far. Stories of our human experience and the things that tie us together have proven over and over to provide the keys to unlock some of the most challenging issues we've faced in history. So today, I'd like to introduce you to my great-great-grandfather, Jefferson Lewis Edmonds. We can go to the next slide. A formerly enslaved man turned newspaper editor, farmer, and civil rights advocate who dedicated his life to his family, his community, and to the advancement of a fulfilled Black American life. You'll hear about Jefferson using his newspaper, The Liberator, as a platform to combat local and national government policies engineered to restrict Black American rights and our ability to freely exercise our citizenship. So as I share Jefferson's story today, I ask all the task force members to bear in mind that many of the battles Jefferson was tackling in his paper, over 120 years ago, are some of the same issues we face today. And so my question for all of us is, how might we learn from his story as we approach this historic moment in national reparations? Next slide. But first, let me take you to Crawford, Mississippi. It's October of 1852, where Jefferson was born, enslaved on the Edmonds Plantation. This is an article for the Los Angeles Times in 1909. So Jefferson was commissioned to write about his emancipation story. He spent this article describing the first day he found out he was free. So this man here riding in on his horse was his great uncle, who was telling everyone the war was over and they were now free. He describes this information being spread like wildfire. He talked about some of the men that were in the field starting to throw down their tools. And he said he remembered a woman next to him who grabbed her child and said, "You're finally mine. You belong to me now." He described the most beautiful scene. Some formerly enslaved families that had escaped neighboring plantations and were living in the forest. He described them pouring out from behind the trees and joining them for this huge celebration. But as we get towards the end of the article, he describes that celebration was short-lived. They all were coerced into signing a contract with their name, marked X, stay on the plantation as sharecroppers for many years after that moment. Next slide, please. After emancipation, and after being able to leave sharecropping, Jefferson in his early 20s, maybe late teens, I don't have all the dates fully yet, but he moved up north and attended the Freedmen Bureau schools and learned how to read and write and became a teacher on his own. Next slide. And after the passing of the 14th Amendment, Jefferson began canvassing around Mississippi, encouraging Black men to vote for some of the earliest Black senators pictured here. And during this time, he was summoned before a Senate hearing in 1876 to testify about some of the violence and voter suppression he experienced while he was exercising, his kind of newly minted civil rights. Based off of what he's sharing in this testimony, you can see this unsettling, seeing people on their way to the ballots being murdered, being harassed. Next slide. And so I think his feeling that he could only accomplish so much staying in Mississippi and staying in the South, he decided to turn his efforts and become a Pullman porter on the trains that were heading westbound. And he saved up enough money to be able to bring his family to California. I do want to highlight some of the work of scholar and professor Alyssa Richardson of USC, who's done extensive research on the Pullman porters. So many of them moonlit as reporters and journalists, collecting news from some of the passengers on these first class cars, sharing this information within Black newspapers and writing about what was happening in the day. They also supported with distributing these Black newspapers to the South and encouraging folks to leave. Next slide, please. So with enough money in his pocket, he headed westbound with his 8 kids and his wife, Ida. So they landed in LA in the late 1880s. Next slide, please. It's there that he purchased several farms and bought land in West LA and Pasadena. He would later partner with Noah D. Thompson, who was like a Pan-African businessman and journalist. And they started a real estate company and started purchasing land and dividing them into plots and selling to Black families that were leaving the South and needed to find some refuge in the West. This is a picture much later, probably 1911 or so, of his kids on the farm. Next slide, please. So after writing for several newspapers, Jefferson launched his own paper, The Liberator, in 1900. And as you can see, he used his paper as a tool to help people guard their rights, help people prepare for civic life, 40, 50 years after emancipation. He would print ballots and talk and champion for home ownership, women's rights, equal education for Black families, and the banning of lynching. Next slide, please. He often collaborated with Black thought leaders of the country. So this is a young picture of Booker T. Washington, who wrote pieces for the paper. And just to the left are images of Black business owners. And he would encourage all of his readers to patronize their businesses. And he'd write the most beautiful, elaborate bios about how fabulous the food was or how great the haircuts were. He wanted LA to be this new Black hub post-Reconstruction. Next slide. This is my great aunt Susie. This is Jefferson's daughter, who was one of his assistant editors on the paper, and together they really championed for not only civil rights for Black Angelenos at the time, but they included poetry and personal ads. They wrote about international news, national news, and local politics. Next slide, please. And so Jefferson actually had the foresight to keep every single piece of leaf-lit paper and put each one of his papers and put them in bound books. And within these books, he kept them in volumes and handed it down in our family for over 100 years. And so in 2018, my father and I, Paul Edmonds, partnered with the Los Angeles Public Library and the California State Library Initiative, California Revealed, to have all of the papers digitized and offered as a resource for scholars and students and artists to learn about some of our early cultural architects of LA. Next slide, please. And you feel free to just kind of go through all the rest of these slides. These next few slides are all just opportunities that our family had with partnering with cultural institutions, with LA City Hall, and with different museums to start creating community activations, multi-generational educational opportunities for folks to interact with these archives, interact with this living history. We wanted folks to know that these stories aren't just things that should be locked away. These are stories of people who had families that loved this city and wanted something more. And I'll share with all of you, this is also one of my favorites. This is a piece at Hank's Mini Mart in South LA. We've partnered with all kinds of organizations to make sure this history is activated. And so in closing, I want to encourage all of you to also think about the legacy that you're leaving behind, the things that you want to be remembered for. You know, Jefferson built his career around challenging the American political system. He spent a lifetime defining what true evolved Black American citizenship should look like, what it should feel like. When we think about reparations for Black people in America, we should also we should be thinking about not only individual funding and social programs that address the disparities around health, housing, and economic mobility, but in addition, we should be considering allocating funds for building Black-owned and operated cultural institutions, creative centers, community archives, and repositories that will help us stitch back together our histories and help us find our way back to ourselves. You know, our stories deserve a sanctuary, and not just for us, but also for teaching others about our collective past, so that the atrocities that we have experienced and continue to experience in this country will never happen again. Thank you so much.